This podcast may contain explicit language. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique rating style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
Back in the saddle again. It's only us.
Yes.
This is a rare sighting anymore. I think we only have one slot open for the entirety of next season.
People like to be on the show. I don't understand why, but okay.
It's kind of like all the exchange students, like after they leave, we don't understand why they liked us. They lived with us for an entire year. Why would they want to come back? But they do.
Yeah, I don't know. Don't get it, but...
So without further ado, for our 242nd episode tonight, we revisit the 1967 film to close out our season 5 with In the Heat of the Night, the Best Picture winner from that year, directed by Norman Jewison, written by Sterling Silliphant, music by Quincy Jones, starring Sidney Poitier as Detective Virgil Tibbs, Rod Steiger as Police Chief Bill Gillespie, Warren Oates as Officer Sam Wood, Lee Grant as Mrs. Colbert, Larry Gates as Eric Endicott, James Patterson as Lloyd Purdy, William Schiller as Mayor Schubert, and B. Richards as Mama Kaleba. Recognition for this movie, based on the novel by John Ball, In the Heat of the Night would release on August 2nd, 1967. On a shoestring budget of $2 million at the time, the film would go on to gross roughly $24.2 million to finish number 13 at the worldwide box office for 1967. The film was widely praised across the industry and critics alike, and would eventually receive 7 Oscar nominations for Best Director for Jewison, and Sound Effects, and winning Best Picture, Actor for Rod Steiger, Screenplay for Silliphant, Film Editing for Hal Ashby, and Sound. In 2003, In the Heat of the Night was selected by the New York Times as one of the 1,000 best movies ever made. The film has since been recognized by the American Film Institute on the following lists: AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies 10th Anniversary Edition at number 75, AFI's 100 Years, 100 Heroes and Villains with Virgil Tibbs, the number 19 hero. AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movie Quotes with Virgil Tibbs, They Call Me Mr. Tibbs, at number 16. AFI's 100 Years, 100 Cheers at number 21. And in 2002, the film was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry. In the Heat of the Night currently holds a 95% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 76 score on Metacritic, and a 4 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So, as we start each week, Dad, what is your relationship to this film?
I think I'd seen bits and pieces of it until about 15, 20 years ago. There was a book that was released about the 67 Academy Awards, and I read the book and then proceeded to watch all but one of the 5 nominees for the Academy Award for 1967. And then watched it again a couple of times. Then we watched it not too long ago for Revisionist Almanac, and then watched it again now.
Yes, I believe this is at minimum the second time I've seen this movie this year. It might even be the third. I'm not entirely certain. You did mention that we just were on the 1967 episode for the Revisionist Almanac that debuted this December, so a couple of weeks ago. So if you have not checked that out, go and follow it there to get our opinions on the entire Oscars from this year. But the book you mentioned was one I also read in preparation for that episode. That's Pictures at a Revolution by Mark Harris. And you can find the audiobook as well on Audible. That was a great listen. So I don't remember the first time that I watched it. I would venture to say it was somewhere in the last 10 years. I think I watched it first since college. I don't remember watching it in college. But it was one of these... I think by the time we've finished 5 seasons, just about everybody who's listened to the show knows I've finished all the Best Picture winners at least once, and knows that I've also finished the AFI Top 100 list a few different times with various different films. I think because this finished on both the AFI 100 list from 2007, the revisited version, and because it was a Best Picture winner. I want to say this was one I probably knocked out in like 2015, 2016, but I probably didn't rewatch it again until we watched it for the show. I think the first time I watched it, I was much more impressed by the film, and I remember really kind of, for lack of a better term, trashing this on the original episode that we did for this. This was episode 8 from early 2020. And for anybody that's out there, that was originally released on April 16 of 2020. You can go back and listen to that episode. Although I should warn you, the show has drastically changed since we did our first original episodes. I mean, 8, you're talking like very unvarnished, very early on. We were just literally posting the episodes. We were still using Skype to record these. They are raw as hell, like beat up beef at the end of Rocky.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an adventure. The difference between what we did then and what we're doing now. But regardless to say, I remember being very difficult on the episode about this movie at that time in a way that you found disagreeable. And so I remembered it, especially obviously a 10-time guest on the show, Kieran B. of the Best Picture cast, and his show, they've covered this movie, and I had been going through their back catalog last year. And I remember coming across this episode and them having a much more rosy take on this episode. I think Kieran specifically really enjoys Rod Steiger's performance in a way that you also highlighted that when we were doing the Revisionist Almanac episode. And I guess I just never quite felt that way in the last maybe 5 years of my relationship with this film. So I kind of wanted to put it back on the list, give it another chance. So this episode and its scheduling today is directly influenced by my listening to the Best Picture cast sometime in the summer of 2023. So what is the film about, in your estimation?
It's really a story of race relations. It's not as much about Tibbs and Poitier himself as it is about Steiger and the chief having to face the facts that he's never really had his prejudices challenged. He's never had to deal with somebody who is an intellectual superior to himself and a better organized and better trained person than himself. And then on top of it being African American in the Deep South in the 60s. And the growth of Steiger's character through the film is really what the film is about, as much as anything, I think.
I think you're doing a disservice to the film if you limit it to only Steiger's character.
No, I'm not just limiting it, but that's where I think that's the central, if I had to pick what the film is about, that's ultimately, but it's also race relations in general, and it's understanding of each side's position.
See, even though Steiger ends up getting the majority of the screen time and is the bigger presence overall, I mean, yes, they're co-leads, but Steiger kind of gets the more showy performance per se. That's still not to say that I think that this film is a little more nuanced in everybody's prejudices. If you're not looking at Poitier and his targeting, in essence, of Endicott for the murder of the wealthy businessman, then I don't think you're watching the film in full depth. Mm-hmm. Because I want to say it's not just about Steiger. I guess one reason you might be able to separate this from other Best Picture winners that get a lot of criticism for similar kind of stories, that being Green Book and Driving Miss Daisy. This isn't a race relations movie where we have one superior person who isn't at least a little bit nuanced and doesn't show some character flaws. This is at least one where he has a little bit of edge to him comparatively. And so if you were to give this a little bit more credit, that's where I would say the movie is a little bit about. It's trying to break down our individual biases that we come into a situation with.
I can see your point, but I still think the central theme, there's all their themes, there's other concepts, there's how easily prejudices are broken down when the party that is being mistreated offers assistance or salvation. Number of times where there's prejudice and then Poitier's character offers help or redemption for a character in the film, and it alters their opinion of him, is significant. Showing that the prejudices really aren't based upon fact, but more on just lack of information or stereotypes or however you want to say it. But when you have an opportunity to judge individually, the prejudices seem to fall.
I do think that this film is subject to a bit of criticism of the quote unquote, and I shudder to use this actual term, but I have to use the term as it is coined, magical Negro. I don't think it's quite as bad as a film that we actually lauded a little bit more in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, but having this guy who's basically a homicide expert who's using forensic pathology in the Deep South where they have very little knowledge base, or that they're rarely seemingly dealing with high profile homicides. There's a little bit of magical nature to the film.
No, I don't call it magical. In both cases, it's the same thing, which is by making, in the case of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, the doctor so absolutely sterling. I mean, he's Schweitzer coming to life. And the idea of that, Dr. Schweitzer, he was a noted philanthropic doctor in Africa who, I mean, he's considered like the epitome of generosity as far as medicine and such. But it's a situation where there's nothing about this person that would be disdainable. If Hepburn and Tracy's daughter comes and brings this guy in and he's white, you know, they're going to be fawning, oh my God, our daughter hit the jackpot. The only thing that would be hesitant to approving them is the color of his skin. And so you had to make it to that point so that the film worked. The same way with this one. He had to be an expert so that there's no way that they couldn't listen to him except or even question his ability, but for the color of his skin.
I mean, I'm sympathetic to that line of argument. I'm not raising the fact that it can be criticized as a mode of I am criticizing. I'm just saying it's not at least out of bounds.
I just don't think it plays in either of these. I think in both of them, you had to have Poitier's character in both films at this level of competence so that it was clear that the only problem that existed in his action or the reaction to him was his race as opposed to his ability.
So essentially you're agreeing with my premise, but not my conclusion. Or, excuse me, not my conclusion, but at least conclusions that might be raised by others.
I think so, in part. I mean,
you've agreed to the premise. You've said that he has to be to this level. You're just saying that I don't come to the negative conclusion. I find it to be an endearing quality of the movie.
I think it's an important part, and it's necessary to the film in order to establish or show racism.
All right. Well, let's get into the rest of the film. Do you have our plot summary ready for us?
Yes. In the Heat of the Night is a taut, incisive drama that explores the collision of justice and racial prejudice in the Deep South. Sidney Poitier stars as Virgil Tibbs, a Philadelphia detective who reluctantly teams up with a bigoted small-town sheriff played by Rod Steiger to solve a murder in Sparta, Mississippi. Director Norman Jewison builds a gripping procedural around the tension between these two men, each forced to confront his own biases in the face of a shared goal. With its evocative cinematography, unforgettable moments of confrontation, and Quincy Jones' soulful score, In the Heat of the Night, transcends the confines of a murder mystery. It is a film of deep moral resonance, one that holds a mirror to America's struggles with race, power, and reconciliation, while delivering a narrative as electrifying as it is humane.
Thank you. Did you know? Sidney Poitier insisted that the movie be filmed in the North because of an incident in which he and Harry Belafonte were almost killed by Ku Klux Klansmen during a visit to Mississippi. That's why Sparta, Illinois was chosen for the location of filming. Nevertheless, the filmmakers and actors did venture briefly into Tennessee for the outdoor scenes at the cotton plantation, because there was no similar cotton plantation in Illinois that could be used. Poitier slept with a gun under his pillow during production in Tennessee. He did receive threats from local racist thugs, so the shoot was cut short and production returned to Illinois. Did you know? This was the first major Hollywood film in color that was lit with proper consideration for an actor with dark skin color. Haskell Wexler recognized that standard lighting used in filming produced too much glare on most black actors and others of dark complexion. He toned down the lighting to feature Sidney Poitier with better results. Did you know? Rod Steiger was asked by Norman Jewison to chew gum while playing the part. He resisted at first, but then grew to love the idea, and eventually went through 263 packs of gum during shooting. Did you know? Set in a hot Mississippi summer, but filmed during autumn in Illinois, many of the actors had to keep ice chips in their mouths and spit them out before takes to prevent their breath from appearing on camera during the night scenes. Did you know? Scott Wilson so impressed Sidney Poitier that he contacted director Richard Brooks and suggested Wilson for a lead role in Cold Blood, also from 1967. Poitier never mentioned this to Wilson at the time, who only found out about this recommendation after he had been cast. And with that, we will take our first break, and we will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, in 2 weeks we kick off Season 6 with our 243rd episode as we welcome back Andrew Corns of the Revisionist Almanac and Sarah Shea of Shea Cinema to discuss Barry Lyndon from 1975, written and directed by Stanley Kubrick, starring Ryan O'Neal, Marissa Berenson, and Patrick McGee. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Dad, that will in fact be the first of 4 of the Best Picture nominees from 1975 that will be discussed on the show next season.
Yes.
But before we get too much further, since we don't have guests, it's time for everyone's favorite segment. That's right, it's time for Ask Dana Anything. We do not have any listener submissions. We do not have any guest submissions, as there are none. In fact, I think we need to retire this segment.
Yeah.
I think it's worn out its welcome. It's a one-season thing.
Yes.
So
it's fine. Goodbye. Sayonara. Adios. Hasta la vista.
Happy trails.
To you until we meet again.
All right, so let's move into the Stanley Rubric. If you have not been with us for one of our revisit episodes before, where have you been? We've done many of these. I think this is like 20 or something. I guess I've lost count. But essentially, we look at what we originally had for the Stanley Rubric scoring that we usually dedicate the last portion of our show to, and we skip the middle section where we would go through scenes and performances and such, maybe even quotes. If you want that, you can go to the original episode for a lot of that information. But right now, we're just going to focus on the Rubric scoring. So let's go to Legacy is up first, as it always is. This is a measure of the legacy roughly 5 years after the film was released, so about 1972 to now. What is the legacy of this film? This category is split 5 and 5 for a total of 10 points, between 5 points for the industry and how it feels about the legacy, and the audience at large. Dad, would you like to go first or second?
I'll go first. Okay, we had a 7 for Legacy before. For the public, this is a film that's forgotten. I mean, we did our little informal poll in the office, and about 4 people had actually seen it?
No, it was closer to 8.
Okay. But it's not well known. It's not well thought of. Poitier was as big as you could get in 1967, and his career kind of petered out a bit in the 70s.
This was like the last great moment of him as a film star.
So I think for the public, I'm giving it a 2. And for the industry, I'm giving it a 3, simply because Poitier is still held in regards up until his passing. Just, what was it, about 18 months ago?
No, I think it's closer to like 2.5 to 3 years ago. I think it was about January of like 2022.
Okay. Steiger stuck around for a bit, but even his roles kind of petered out after this as well. Overall, then I have a 5.
I would say that this is probably forgotten in context of the other 2 films it was up against that year. Like, for industry professionals, Bonnie and Clyde and The Graduate have much more staying power, although I think both of those films have aged much more poorly comparative to this one. We'll get to that when we get to Classicness, but I'm only a half point different from you in my overall scoring. I gave a 2.5 to the audience. I have a 3 for the industry, as you did, but I have a 2.5, and it's partially only because, and this was made plain to me after we mentioned it in the staff meeting the other day, that the TV show from like the 80s or the 70s or whenever it was, which I never saw, but kept this at least as a concept around a little bit longer. And so I give it a little bit more of a boost up where it has some name recognition, even if it's not necessarily for the movie itself. So as we always do with these revisit episodes, we have to negotiate our score. We currently have a half point difference.
I'll come up.
All right, so we'll end at a 5.5. That means we have moved down 1.5 points in our overall score. We have then impact and significance. This is a measurement of the impact and significance at the time of this movie in that it came out. So the 5 years that we just discounted for legacy, those are now as part of the impact. So roughly from 1967 to 1972, what is the impact of this film? This is again split between 5 points for the industry and how it feels about the impact and significance at the original time of the release of this film, as well as the audience and how they felt at the time of its release. Our original score on this one was a 6. I think we were too low. Personally, I think that you can make a very clear argument that in 1967, Sidney Poitier was the largest star in Hollywood, even if it really ended pretty much after the Oscars was done. I think he changed in that singular year, with this being maybe the most, I guess, critically well-regarded of the 3 films that he had, but changed kind of the way that studios looked at including films about and for African Americans in this country. And so if for nothing else, that would probably get several points. But additionally, to have almost universal critical praise, to win actor, screenplay, best picture, and be up for several other awards in a year where you have allegedly 2 all-time classics, I think that also has to get some meritorious recognition. So I have a 5 for the industry. Number 13 is also nothing to slouch at. Again, this was a fairly universally well-liked film. And the reason why I also don't dismiss number 13 in 1967 is there was a significant portion of this country that probably this film was not shown in or marketed to. So I'm going to go with a 4 on that side of it. I have a 9.
Oh, wow. All right.
Oh, the tough agreement. I feel it coming.
And that's exactly what we have.
Wow.
Right on. Spot on.
5 seasons later, and we yet again continue to agree. Anything you'd like to add?
No, not really. I mean, it was 13th. I mean, on the budget that it had, I mean, it made a lot of money. So they should have been ecstatic.
No, it was an overall successful film.
Yeah.
I think you'd be hard-pressed to say it wasn't.
I doubt highly it played in Sparta, Mississippi.
If there is a Sparta, Mississippi.
I believe there is.
There probably is. I mean, it's a fairly common name, but even so. So we have a 9 on that one. We have moved up 3 points from that original category. All right, before we get to the break, let's move to novelty quickly. Original score on this one was a 7. Since our original episode on this one, we feel very differently about this category. As with the past 2 categories, we have since adopted a split scoring system, and that's more of an invention of this year as opposed to many years like the previous 2 categories. But for novelty, currently we are dividing this between the originality of the idea, that could mean a lot of different things here, or the other 5 points being for the execution on that idea. So, would you like to go first or second here, Pop?
I'll let you go first.
I don't think this is that novel. Like, Sidney Poitier had been in movies for well over a decade. He'd won a Best Actor award for kind of playing this role already. The only difference was I think this was like the first time that he was a cop, which I guess has a certain level of novelty to it, but I mean, you're grasping at it a little bit. I'm going to give a generous 2 on the novelty of this movie. I do think that the one place that you could really reward it for is the slap of Endicott was like a big deal. Yes. When that specific scene, when it played, because this is the 60s. I mean, now this feels kind of quaint a little bit, but at the time, that was a big deal. A black man standing up for himself and slapping a plantation owner, quite literally, that was a big deal. The execution of this, I mean, I could be a little bit flexible here. Again, I went a little bit generous and went with a 4. I think partially because there's really nothing poor about the film. Maybe that should be like a 2.5 instead of a 4, but I think your lead performances are solid. They're not like perfection. I'm not fawning over Steiger or Poitier in this movie. I mean, Poitier delivers a very solid performance. Steiger, the same thing. I think most of your peripheral characters are, for the most part, pretty believable. I think Scott Wilson does an excellent job in this movie. I think Warren Oates does an excellent job in this movie. I think Lee Grant does an excellent job in this movie. But I don't know. There's no way I'm going to get up to a 5. I just don't see a lot of nitpicks. So maybe that is a 4. I'm at a 6.
For the originality, yeah, okay, it's a worn out trope. Murder, mystery, wrongfully accused, slowly evolve, figure it out at the end. You know, I mean, normally that would be a 1. But when you pack it with the location at that time in the Deep South with race overtones, I went up to a 4 because putting it in that context was completely original and fresh than any other murder mystery that had been released to that date. As far as the execution itself, you can point to the strong performances out of everybody in that cast. Warren Oates had a great performance in this. I mean, it was, even the thugs who were trying to kill Tibbs came across as very authentic and believable. I think Jewison did a great job. He deserved the nomination for Best Director. I can't remember who won Best Director that year. Mike Nichols, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I could understand why Mike Nichols got it. But still, I think overall it was done brilliantly. It was clean. There's not a spot in the film that I think really is too slow. It evolves well. You can follow or trace the thought processes of the various characters. So the execution, I'm at a 4.5. So I'm at an 8.5 overall. So that thus ends our congeniality.
At least for the time being. On the side of novelty, I just
split it. I'm at a 4 to 2.
I mean, I suppose if we've, I mean, we still have the other side of things to try and go over yet too, but all right. So let's just take it on a novelty standpoint. I guess what really has me is not necessarily the context of the film or necessarily even the story, although murder mystery and the murder mystery itself was not even like really, it didn't seem to be the central theme of the actual movie. It just seemed to kind of like hold everything together. But by the end of it and the realization, you're like, oh, that was the conclusion of the movie? Oh, okay. Like the murderer does not have this like great surprise. It's not an Agatha Christie novel in any way.
Yes.
And I guess my biggest beef against the novelty of this is, again, Sidney Poitier has basically played the magical Negro in every other film that he is. He's the exceptional teacher. He's the exceptional doctor. He's the exceptional lawyer. He's the exceptional businessman. Now he's the exceptional detective. I guess your novelty is Rod Steiger chewing gum?
No. I gave you the reason for the novelty.
Okay. To quote juror number, I think 7, we want to hear your arguments again.
I told you the originality is based in the context of race relations in the Deep South in 1967. And to take a normal story that would have been run-of-the-mill, would have been nothing of any significance, and to put the elements that I've outlined, race relations, Deep South, 1967, gives it a whole new freshness that deserves higher marks, because there wasn't a lot of films taking on this point.
I just fundamentally disagree with that. There were plenty of race relation movies. I mean, quite literally, Poitier's in 3 of them this year. Like, I don't want to disparage, because from a historical context, like I said, this changed the way in which Black people were viewed as potential film stars, and that they also had an audience they had to cater to. But that led to blaxploitation, not to like more central figures starring in movies. We didn't get Denzel for another like 30 years. 25, I guess. All right, I will split that with you, but what do you want to do on the execution side of it? I guess my biggest issue with going up any more than I did, and I thought I was a little bit generous with a 4, is what's exactly exceptional about the movie? Like, you start getting into the 4.5s and the 5s. Like, this is a very solid, it's a very well done movie, but like, let's not confuse that this is The Matrix or something, as far as like a technical aspect, or I'm trying to think. It's not The Godfather for acting.
All right. I'll go to your 4.
Okay.
So we're at a 7, which is where we started the previous episode.
We argued ourselves into a circle. Hurrah. All right. So to recap where we've been to this point, we went from a 7 to a 5.5 on Legacy. We went from a 6 to a 9 on Impact and Significance, and we've argued ourselves around in a circle, like circling the wagons, on a 7 for Novelty. Let's take our second break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes. Michael Cole, 84, American actor, was in the TV show The Mod Squad and the soap opera General Hospital, as well as It.
I would have to assume it's like the Tim Curry 1990s It.
Probably.
Yeah. I obviously was not around to watch The Mod Squad. I don't really see it in syndication at all. Do you remember Michael Cole?
No, I don't remember him. I did watch The Mod Squad a bit when I was a kid, because it was on in the early 70s. but the show does not age well.
Okay.
It does not.
Well, regardless, I'm sure it provided plenty of people across the nation, plenty of entertainment, and so we recognize Mr. Cole here with a moment of silence here in his honor. Thank you. All right. We left off at classicness. Now, this is the most difficult category to really define as far as how we do our scoring. We usually start at a baseline of 7 because there's more room to move down on something for how it's aged, as opposed to moving up, where we have very few things that we can give it in order to move it up. However, we seemingly do every week. Basically, there's nothing problematic with this, and so let's move it up. Maybe we should reconsider how this category is done, since I know we've recently got some complaints for at least one film that we did on a classicness score. But originally on this one, we had a 5.5. You usually lead this category.
All right. We start generally at a 7, and overall, this film ages very well. In fact, it would probably have scored an 8, or excuse me, a 9 to me as to how well it's aged, except for one thing. And that's the scene where the girl is supposedly naked. You can't see anything, but still implied. And then you find out later she's 16. That by itself, just the fact that they're kind of showing without showing anything, does not age real well from that standpoint, because back at that time, 16 was not a problem per se for a lot of adults. We've become much more protective of children under the age of 18 now, especially as problems have arisen on the internet and with all the hidden cameras and all the rest of that stuff, sexual assaults and everything. So I had to give it a point down for that, because I don't think that portion of it ages well. I think you could have done it much more implied than it was. I think it went probably a step too far from modern sensibilities.
So do you have a number?
I'm at an 8. I'd said I went up to a 9, and now I'm going down a point. I guess I should have just concluded that if people couldn't follow, that I was at an 8.
You're expecting other people to do math?
Somebody's got to do it around here.
Yes, somebody does. I actually buy your argument. It's not one I'd necessarily considered, so it's a fair point. I think if you add in that there's at least a fair criticism for the magical Negro theory or criticism on this, you could probably knock it down another half point. I think the only thing I could really give this movie extra points for is maybe a timelessness. And so that might move it a point ahead. I think if I'm doing my math right, that's a 6.5. So 6.5 and an 8. We're at least going up comparative to what we originally had, which was a 6.
Well, I can
or
go
excuse
down
me,
to
it was a 5.5.
I can go to a 7 or a 7.5.
You're expecting me to counter at 7.25, aren't you?
No, I'm not. I'm expecting you to agree with me, because this
You raised a point, and I knocked mine down as a result of it. Like, where would you have had 2 points up to a 9?
Because of the classicness or the timelessness of the film. You could
You have
release
2
this
points
film.
for that?
Yes, because this film could be released right now, and there would be no problem, except for the one scene that I downgraded again for a point.
Yeah, there'd be no point, because this would be released by Disney as like their family movie of the summer.
No, they wouldn't.
Yeah, they would. They'd probably put Dwayne
movie.
The Rock Johnson in it.
Jack Black as the sheriff.
It's either that or Kevin Hart. Oh, I almost got the spit take.
Yeah. Or Kevin James as the sheriff.
Well, he roughly...
It was Paul Bart, or Paul Bart, or Paul Blart.
Yeah, Paul Blart.
Yeah, Mall Cop, yeah.
Why not Beck Bennett for the sheriff?
Yeah.
You
might have to explain to some people who Beck Bennett is.
They can look that up. That's their own thing. I don't need to explain every reference I make. That's at least a reference from this century.
The century is only 25 years old.
Yes, it's a quarter over.
I'm sorry, I lived a big chunk of the last century. So
okay, so now you're old too?
Yeah, well.
All right, we got to settle this.
I'm at a 7.5. You're at a 6.5. I came down a half a point. So where are you going?
I'll counter at 7.
7.4.
All right, it's going to end up being average. Let's just go to a 7.25 and end it.
That's fine. That's where I would have started to begin with.
I know. You've taught me too well.
I know.
All right, then let's go to rewatchability. Submit any test that you'd like for this one. I don't care if it's the tickle my pickle test that you have, or whatever you want to insert here. But rewatchability, you just have to get a score out of 10. Okay,
we had a 6 the first time around, and to me, having watched it, I mean, I've watched it several times now, and I realize how easy it really is to watch. And it's a film that I'm going to recommend to people who have never seen it. And I probably will put it on every 2 years or so for nothing else, just because, hey, I haven't seen it in a while. I like it. It's a good film. Why not? So my normal is if I watch it on a regular basis, a kind of I'll watch it again type of deal is a 6. Actually, this is kind of, the more I watch it, the more I think it's a little better than that. So I went with a 6.5.
All right. Our original score on this one was a 6, so you're slightly above that. I mean, if I'm to employ the test that I often do for this, I think my score is kind of determined to be basically lower at all times in this category. So I'm not sure it's the best test of what we're trying to do here, because I don't see myself really putting this movie on unless I have to anymore. I just don't know how much more I can glean out of this movie. It's fine. It's entertaining. It's okay. But it's nothing that I feel like I really need to return to, or I'm excited if this ever comes up on the show again. So from that standpoint, I have a 2. And for leaving it on, I may watch a few minutes if it's like on TCM or Tubi or something. But am I really sitting down and watching more than maybe 10 minutes at a time of this? I probably turn it whenever there comes up a commercial, to be quite honest. So, I mean, if that's my barometer, I'm somewhere between like a 2.5 to 3. I'll be a little generous and I'll say a 5. This is subjective. We just average this one, to be honest.
Yeah.
There's no way to...
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a 5.75 between the two of us. For audience score on this one, originally we had a 9.2 because we took the Rotten Tomatoes score. The Rotten Tomatoes score has not changed. However, adding in the Google score from this one, an 82%, gives us an 8.7. So to repeat the categories, for legacy, we moved from a 7 to a 5.5. For impact and significance, we moved from a 6 to a 9. For novelty, we moved from a 7 to a 7. For Classicness, we moved from a 5.5 to a 7.25. And for Rewatchability, we moved a small step down from 6 to 5.75. For Audience Score, we moved from a 9.2 to an 8.7. The original score on this film, when we did this for episode 8, April 16th of 2020, was a 40.7. It is currently number 180 on our list. Tonight, after our new scoring, we now have a 44.95, and it currently places it on our list at number 134 between Slumdog Millionaire and Glory.
Okay.
So it moves up about, what would that be? 45 spots? 46 spots? I think that's fair for a revisit. As always, if you disagree with any of our scoring and your name is not Andrew Corns, you can write us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, or YouTube at Gmote Podcast, or you can contact us on the website, RonnieDuncanStudios.com/Gmote Podcast. Let's move into remaining questions. I don't have any.
No.
There's nothing that I feel is like unsaid or, whatever about this movie. It feels pretty well wrapped up. So I guess final thoughts for the week and I guess the season.
Let me just ask this question. When we started this show back in 2020, we compiled a list and we had how many movies on the list of what we were going to do?
427.
And how many have we done so far?
So if we move this one around, I believe it's 218.
Okay. And how many of those films that we've done so far were on that original list?
That I have no idea, but I would say it's at least a handful, 2 handfuls, maybe a good couple dozen hadn't been on that list. Like Three Idiots was not on that list. I don't think Eternal Sunshine was on that list.
No.
Magnolia, I don't think was on that list. So we've covered some stuff even this year that was not on that original list. Certainly The Room was not on that list, and The Greatest Show on Earth was not on that list.
No.
Those still take up the very dregs, the bottom of our overall list.
Yeah, I know. So, in retrospect, I mean, do you really think we would have done this many episodes and gotten to this point when we started?
I had no real expectations, so yes and no. I mean, you don't create a list of like 427 movies without at least theorizing that you could someday get to all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, next year we will be covering one movie that we talked about in the moment that it actually came out on the show. That's how long we will have been on.
Which movie is that?
So the final episode of next season is Promising Young Woman.
Oh, yeah. Hard to believe it's been 5 years.
Yep, that was, I think, our first Oscars thing
show
that we did.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's been a while.
Oh, I know.
But I guess since we kind of have already alluded to it a little bit, just to recap as it stands at the end of season 5, the current bottom of the list. You want to make any guesses what's at the bottom?
The Room.
The Room is the very bottom, yes.
The Help is near there.
Yes.
Greatest Show on Earth.
Yes.
What's the Stallone Pele film?
Victory.
Victory.
Yes, that's also there.
In fact, when you said we were doing it, I was like, do you know what that is? Because I saw it when it was released, and I'm like, okay. I don't know what else is there.
Okay. So the bottom 10, including at least 2 films that we have discussed this year, and including very recently. Number 10, Joker. Friday, Blood Simple, which we've said is too low, but I don't know how we'd change the scoring that much. The Help, Saw, The Quiet Man, Wedding Crashers, Victory, The Greatest Show on Earth, and The Room maintains its place in the very last spot.
Yes.
All right. So, since we've done the bottom of the list, let's do the top 10. Do you know what the top 10 of the list currently is?
Know that we have The Dark Knight.
Correct.
I know that Jaws is in there somewhere.
That's number 2.
Casablanca.
7.
The Best Years of Our Lives.
10.
The Godfather.
Yes, at number 9.
Godfather 2.
No, that's a little bit further down.
Further down.
Yep, Godfather 2 is at number 14 right now.
North by Northwest.
Correct. That is at number 4.
Indiana Jones. And the first one.
Raiders of the Lost Ark is at 12.
Is at 12. Okay. Boy, I'm not... No, I'm drawing a blank. Go ahead.
So I will say that we have covered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these in revisit just this year. So that would be The Best Years of Our Lives, The Godfather, Pulp Fiction, 12 Angry Men, and The Shawshank Redemption. So currently it sits at number 10, The Best Years of Our Lives, which we covered with Kieran earlier this year in a revisit. The Godfather, which I think we did for, maybe it was last year. It was an Easter episode where we did a revisit. I don't know. It's hard to recollect all of these films after a certain point in time. 8, we did a revisit of Pulp Fiction with Adam Freed a couple of months ago. 7, Casablanca, which we've done at least 3 episodes on, and I feel we're probably Casablanca'd out, unfortunately for you.
Yeah.
6 was an episode we did this year that is an original. That was Rear Window, which we covered with our multiple-time guest, V.P. Morris. 5, we had 12 Angry Men, where we welcomed on both Kieran and Sarah Shea, who will be back on with us 2 weeks from now. 4, we had North by Northwest. 3, The Shawshank Redemption, which we also had Kieran on, so he's been on 3 different revisits this year. 2, Jaws, which we will be doing a revisit of next year with a couple of, at least not new, but it'll be only their second-time guests. We have that to look forward to for our kind of holiday episode the week after July 4th. And then finally, The Dark Knight is still our number 1 film. So I think that's a pretty solid top 10. Honestly, we still have, I mean, when you're getting down the list and like number 25 is Die Hard, it's a pretty unassailable top 25. So any other remaining thoughts at the moment?
No, I'm looking forward to next year. I'm looking forward to spending the time doing it with you.
Well, I do too. I know you look very much forward to the show. I'm glad we could continue it through at least the first semester of law school. We'll see how second semester in the summer goes. Apparently, I'm a cinemasochist to keep trying to do this over and over and over and still do a weekly show. But that being said, we have reduced the number of guests, 2 guests at a time while trying to do law school, and these 3-hour behemoth podcasts that, especially every time Kieran's on, they're just becoming too cumbersome. So I need to cut down on the total amount of things that I have to edit. We'll go to 1 guest per appearance, unless it's like some very specific situations, such as when we do the original Star Wars trilogy in May. And I guess this is the portion of the show where I tease next season. But when we do all of those, we have multiple time, and I think in most cases, big time repeat guests on for those episodes. So that'll be fun. I know we have Gladiator coming up. We have All About Eve. We have a revisit of Sunset Boulevard. We have several Billy Wilders, frankly, coming up because we're also doing the Lost Weekend for its, boy, is that going to be 80th anniversary? So, yeah.
Talking about a film that's aged well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are some, I'll have a few nitpicks with that as far as like some technical aspects, but it's understanding 80 years ago of alcoholism, I think is still actually exceptional. But we don't want to spike the lens too early on that one.
Yeah.
And I know another favorite of yours that we're going to be having coming up. We're bringing Mom on for that episode, thankfully, to balance you out, but The Breakfast Club.
One of the reasons why I dislike John Hughes.
Yeah, I know. Oh, that'll be an interesting one. Also, for our 250th episode, we're going to be doing Schindler's List. So, a very somber episode to be trying to tackle. I fully expect to be sobbing at the end of the movie like I did the first time I saw it. I just could not stop for at least a half an hour after the movie was done. It is incredibly powerful. I believe yes. I had it number 1 on my power ranking of the Best Picture winners last year, and I think it'll probably remain there, particularly given recent events. But we've also got The Martian, we've got Seven, we've got Ordinary People, we've got The Night of the Hunter, The Usual Suspects. We've got a lot crammed into next year. So we will be glad to have you all back to join us. We have a lot of things exciting planned. We have not yet announced it, but we will be doing a live stream in the near future of our rankings of the Bond films.
Yes.
That will be up solely on our YouTube channel, but we'll do a live stream of that, and so hopefully you can all join us and participate in that. We've got the first of its kind. We're completely redoing an entire episode. Frankly, because the first episode of the original episode is so bad, so poorly edited, and had so many glitches and errors that we invited back our guests from that original episode. I believe it was like episode 12 or 13, something like that.
I was not involved with.
Correct. From the Back to the Future crew. And we'll be pre-recording that one for its 40th anniversary this year of Back to the Future. Yeah, that sounds right. That's not even going to be a revisit. We're not negotiating scores. We're going to do the average. We're doing the whole episode over. So that will be a specialty. It's going to be one of those rare exceptions where we throw out the old episode and tell you to just listen to this one. But otherwise, any final things that you want to put in?
No, I wish everyone a blessed Christmas and New Year. I'm looking forward to 2025, even though I'm getting yet another year older.
You're already another year older. You just turned 61. I know.
But I'll be 62 by the time the next season's over. So I'm just continuing to try to find new ways to burn my energy. Just kind of kicking back and savoring it.
Yes, I will be doing some restful vacation over the next week. We are off traditionally like we normally are this next week. We try and take some time to, watch other movies that we aren't forced to watch. Not that that's usually a bad thing for this show, but it's just nice to not have to watch something. And so there are a lot of things that I put on the back burner due to law school that I'd like to catch up on. I know Nora hit VOD this week, so I'd like to catch that. Still haven't caught Amelia Perez, so try and catch up on some of these Oscar nominees before I get back into the thick of it here coming in January. But just spend some time with people and maybe stay off of your television for 5 minutes. Have a conversation with somebody that's maybe not over a laptop. But wishing everyone glad tidings, a pleasant end to the year. We will see you back and better than ever in 2025. That'll do it for us this week. Thank you for listening. Barry had his faults, but none could say of him that he was not a good and tender father. He loved his son with blind impartiality. He denied the boy nothing. It is impossible to convey what high hopes Barry had for young Brian, or how he indulged in 1,000 fond anticipations of the boy's future success and figure in the world. But fate had determined that Barry should leave none of his race behind him, that he should finish his life poor, lonely, and childless. In 2 weeks, we will be back to kick off Season 6 with our 243rd episode as we welcome back Andrew Corns of the Revisionist Almanac and Sarah Shea of Shea Cinema to discuss Barry Lyndon from 1975. Written and directed by Stanley Kubrick, starring Ryan O'Neal, Marissa Berenson, and Patrick McGee. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in on our fun. You can also email the show at thenewRonnieDuncanStudios.com or at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. Find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GModePodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ryan Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our technical provider and distributor is Captivate FM.